Hello and welcome to Hustle to Flow. So, last week we talked about, or we explored, why data architecture is important for founder led businesses. And we need to take that further because we don't want architecture just for the sake of it. We need decisions, which is why we invest in any tool, right? And so, today we're going to explore the data behind the decision and give an example of how that actually looks in reality and why you may not be able to get that data right now because of the way the architecture is set up in whichever system you are using. Okay. So let's go ahead and hop into this discussion. So, when we talk about the data behind the data, what we're trying to get to is the answers to the questions we need to make better decisions. We need to teach the business to speak to us so that we can get the data we need for our business. There are a lot of people can share information about their business, but it's not your business. And the challenge that we're facing right now is that even very accomplished um, entrepreneurs who have a wealth of experience are not building their businesses in the same environment you are necessarily, right? So we need to return to first principles. And I talked about that. If you caught the Seymour Guest List newsletter, we talk about that there. So I won't go into more here. Okay. But it's important. So let's move on. Okay. So I've talked about this before. A productive decision requires the right question, the right answer, and enough architecture to bring them both together. Okay. So, in previous examples, let's take the example of someone who is looking for funding to expand the kitchen for a new client. Let's use that example. Okay. So, the founder's answer is that we need a bigger kitchen. Okay. That's the answer. So, we start out and we said, well, we need to make a productive decision. The decision has been, we're looking at a decision that has been made, which is we need a bigger kitchen. And then the question, though, is the kitchen really the constraint? So when we talk about making those types of decisions, this is where data is needed. And the reason it's important is because you can do most, up to a certain point, you can make these decisions with your gut, right? You've been in business for a while. You already have the structure. You understand the nature of how things work. So you can make this decision in your gut to a point. But you get to a point as you're growing where you can no longer hold everything in memory anymore, unless you just have one of those memories where you can do that, which, hey, that more power to you. But for the rest of us, we need to understand how to go about getting the data to make the decisions that are productive for the business. Okay. So let's look at, I need to move myself. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this. In this example, this is not Profit Visibility Lab. We're just talking about how data is used. And I just felt like this was a good example to be able to just take an actual, well, not an actual, but take a model situation and walk it through the process of getting to the data. Okay, that's the plan, and it won't be long. So let's take a look at this decision. So there's 4 questions. When your business is speaking to you, then it needs to be able to answer your questions. That's what I mean by teach your business to speak, because once you have the right architecture in place, your business can speak to you and give you answers to questions you need to make productive decisions, right? So if we look at the revenue system, one of the questions we want to answer in this case is, will enough demand exist to use the added capacity? In other words, okay, this is great. I got a new client and they're committed to X number of X amount of volume, but if something happens, how will we get that additional demand? It's a question. doesn't mean that you won't make the same decision, but still to be considered. If we look at offer, how much committed revenue supports this investment, right? Like you need a way to look at your current demand and your current offers and see whether or not, you can actually support it. And then when we look at capacity, we're looking at what exactly is preventing the fulfillment today. In other words, is there another way to meet this? Because sometimes the gut reaction is, oh man, we can't do this. But if you think a little harder, then you can find a different way that perhaps is more appropriate for your business. And then finally, when we look at the retain quadrant, we're looking at, will the economics and the customer lifetime support this capital outlay? In other words, again, if this business dried up, what would happen? Because you're still on the hook. Once you funded, the money is gone, right? You've invested. And so you need to look at how to actually support your business in that way. So these are some questions that we want to teach the business to speak to us about, to answer these questions, right? So now, the way we do that is, and I posted about this early in the week, the contact is really the atom of business. In other words, it is the smallest valuable component in a business that we can attach activity to and be able to see that move through the business. So how does that apply? I want to make the connection between the decision that needs to be made and the data, and is it really true? Let's test it. Is the contact really the unit that I would be tracking data on to get an answer to the question, right? So let's look at it. So you start out with a contact, and that seems really silly. Jill, we're talking about investing in the kitchen, and you're talking to me about contacts. Yes. So we have the contact. We look at the relationship source, whether there's commercial signal, all these things, the opportunity, the payment, delivery, aggregating the pattern, and the capacity decision. Why? Because we need to understand what the business will do. So the one contact is just data. Yeah, you're right. But many contacts reveal movement, and movement is what informs the decision. So again, we start, if we have the ability to track the contact and everything that happens to it through the journey, then we can teach our business to speak to us in a language that answers the questions we need answered to make a decision, right? The best decision. Now, when we talk about the contact as at the atom, right? As the atom of business, we're looking at all these different things we collect. Maybe you collect these items in your business, in your system. Maybe you don't. But the architecture is what identifies what components of data you need to collect to get the answers you need to make decisions. So when the business speaks, you're wanting it to answer these questions. How many new relationships are entering? Which sources are producing those relationships? How many are moving towards commercial relevance? In other words, we're looking at demand at a lower level of detail so we can anticipate what would happen to the business. So we can project that out. You have to have the data. Well, you don't have to. You can pull the answer out your gut like you've been doing, but it's a little hard now because of just the sheer volume of surfaces and activities and resources available, right? How many become clients? There's numbers, there's stats that you're going to get from these behaviors that allow the business to speak to you if you're collecting the right data. And that is what data architecture provides you with. It provides you with confirmation that the data that you need to answer the questions, not the data for the dashboard. We're not talking about dashboards. We're talking about the data that the business needs to collect in order to fuel your decision making, okay? And this last one, like how much revenue is on those clients and how much delivery load do they create, speaks directly to what is my ability now to maintain and expand this additional capacity so that it's increasing revenue to my business? These are all questions that begin with just having the initial data available. Okay. And then the data informs a decision. Because just to look at having a new client and then to say, oh, well, I need to expand my kitchen for that capacity. I love it. I'm excited, but we're going to need a bigger kitchen, right? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you have 100 new accounts, but only 3 of them became clients. That means you can't necessarily, you don't want to, you're going to depend on this new client, but you're not having enough momentum to eventually fully utilize the capacity within that kitchen, right? Or maybe one client accounts for 70% of your projected demand, right? You're exposed. Maybe the new client is large, but all the other relationship movement is flat. Uh-oh. I lost my, what happened? Where am I? Okay, what just happened? All right, I don't know what's just happened to my screen here. I was on a roll too. What's just going on? I don't know. Okay, let's see. Well, okay. Let's go to There you go. More than one way to skin. Okay. Now I thought there was more than one way to skin a cat. Anyway, I'm not going to take any more of your time with this. I don't know what I have pressed upon to cause the screen to do this. If you know, put a comment to let me know what it is. But anyway, the point is, we're just going to keep it moving. The point is that there are many things that could cause you to, there are many things that could occur in your business that would indicate that perhaps the first decision in terms of what you need to do is not necessarily the right one for your business. And the only way to really understand what the right decision is for your business is to be capturing that data from the source. And it takes time to collect the data. But once you have the right architecture in place and you begin capturing the data in a reliable way, then when you get to a point where you need to make these types of decisions, you can make them quickly. And so the point of this Hustle to Flow is just to begin or continue the dialogue about why data architecture is important for founder-led businesses, and take it a step further and talk about what is the data behind the decisions and what do I need to do to create a business that knows how to speak and answer the questions that I need answered. So that was the point. Now, next week on Tuesday, we're going to take this even further. We're going to take it into the lab. Profit Visibility Lab is on Tuesday at 6:30. And in there, what we're going to do is take this very example and break it down into what are the specific elements of data that we need to have collecting in our system in order to have the system speak to the business. Now, this is not something new, right? Companies do it all the time. We pay thousands of dollars to hire consultants to develop architectures for our business. My suggestion or what I am proposing is, why wait until you're moving and you're scaling at a rapid pace? Why not build in architecture from the beginning and develop a culture that is based on understanding how changes in the business impact the architecture, so you're growing and evolving as you move, instead of waiting and having to slow down at a point when the system breaks. Okay, so with this, let's we're going to wrap this up here right now. These are really short, Hustle to Flow, and I encourage you, if your schedule permits, to join the Profit Visibility Lab, which is next Tuesday. It's Tuesdays at 6:30. And in this Profit Visibility Lab, we will break down in detail the actual flow of the mapping of what it looks like to go from the contact, which is the atom of business, to an actual decision. Okay, good stuff. So with that, this has been Jewel T. Leonard, and I encourage you to see more, guess less, and always diagnose before you deploy. Bye for now.